Parrying has been a Souls mechanic since the very beginning. But in the earlier Souls games, getting good at it never really felt like it gave you a significant advantage in dealing with bosses. In Elden Ring though, all that changed. Rather than being a niche skill that's only really useful on a few bosses throughout the PvE experience, in Elden Ring, parrying opens up completely separate strategies for bosses, which are sometimes easier than the alternative. So with Shadow of the Erdtree less than 2 months away, and my thoughts once again turning to getting really nerdy about parrying, I thought it would be fun to show you what are, for my money, the 10 hardest parries in the game, and how to do them, along with 5 of the most satisfying, and some mechanical oddities and curiosities that I found along the way. I didn't include NPC parries or spell parries in this video, as they're kind of 2 different videos entirely. So welcome to an Elden Ring ranking video that literally fucking no one has asked for. Let's begin with the 10th spot for the hardest parry. Godskin Noble. While generally Noble is quite an easy boss to parry, there's one attack that I've always struggled to get consistent with. The slow wind up into a fast stab is really hard to get right. I've never been able to find a reliable visual cue. Ultimately, I just settled on memorizing the length of the attack, hence its inclusion in this list. If you're really struggling, there is an audio cue that might work for you. Right before the attack, there's a metallic zing. If you wait about a second and then parry, that rhythm may help. At number 9, Morgott's Upward Swing. I've always said that I think Morgott is the hardest boss to parry in Elden Ring, because you're always in danger in between parries because of how fast some of his moves are. One of the worst attacks you can get is this upward swing with an overhead follow-up. The safest and most sensible thing to do when you see him go for this attack is to roll the first and parry the follow-up. The first attack is parryable though, if you're quick enough. To get this one, you want to watch for the sword going down towards the floor and disappearing behind him for your cue to input. This one still catches me out a lot. Next up at number 8, Bell-bearing Hunters. Bell-bearing Hunters are super tough enemies, but also great examples of how going for parry strats can make a boss so much more safe and consistent. One move that's particularly tough to parry though is the flying red sword attack. This combo has 3 swings, with the third being parryable. In order to get it, you need to recognise this attack and roll the first 2 swings perfectly. Even if you dodge those first 2 swings successfully, if you were late on the second roll, you won't have enough time for the parry. To get it, you need to roll as early as possible while still dodging the swings and hit your parry as you come out of that second dodge. For number 7, we head to Radagon. And him being on this list might be a surprise, as he's actually one of the easiest bosses to parry in my opinion. Rather than the slow wind up and instantaneous attack that is far more common in the later games, Radagon feels like a Dark Souls 1 enemy when it comes to his attacks and parrying them. For almost his entire moveset, you can see the attack coming towards you and you parry as it's about to hit. Very intuitive, very Dark Souls 1. But then there's the thrust attack. This one has 2 variations. Most of the time you'll see it after a stomp. Whenever you see the stomp, be ready for a quick parry as you exit your roll, similar to the Bell-bearing Hunters. but sometimes he will just do it immediately. For this, you just have to input quick. Interestingly, if you fight Radagon very aggressively, you will almost never see this attack. To get footage of it for this video, I had to deliberately play very passively and roll away from him, because I think it's one the AI queues up to punish retreating players. Now, one of the most exciting things for me about Shadow of the Erdtree coming out in June is the thought that I'll finally be able to make a video without this dickhead showing up. But since it's not June yet, here he is to ruin everyone's day again. This is an interesting one, because the parry itself isn't nearly as hard as half of the things on this list. Parrying Gideon is difficult because you'll have to survive all of his nonsense for long enough to get an opportunity to. Whenever Gideon has the scepter in his hands, he'll most likely use it to cast knowledge above all, but he can also just start spamming R1s with it. When he does, you can parry him to open him up for a crit. Whenever you have to fight him straight up, it's worth having a buckler in the offhand in case you get this opportunity, as anything that gives you a break from the relentless spell spamming is great in my book. Riposting him is super satisfying. And speaking of which, as we're at the halfway point, let's talk about some good parries. At number 5, Morgott returns for his second appearance in this video. Now, you'll have to forgive me for this one because it's not really a parry, but it is something really cool you'll likely only know if you're a parry nerd. So in phase 2, Morgott has this blood overhead attack with a big wind up before a slam down. If you parry, as you would if this was a parryable attack, no damage is registered. Now, I've mentioned this before in videos, but I've never been completely certain about what's going on here. However, by slowing the game down and turning on the hitboxes, we can see exactly what's happening here. The parry animation itself causes your character to unintentionally duck the attack. And it's completely useless knowledge to possess, as doing this gives you no advantage. It's great fun to do it just because you know you can though. The fourth coolest parry is parrying the birds. Just batting these things out of the sky before they can make your life a misery isn't just fun, but it's also such a good strat for dealing with them, as they'll almost always do this parryable attack first. I just wish there was a riposte animation for them. The third most satisfying parry in Elden Ring is every parry you do against a Crucible Knight. Crucible Knights are to Elden Ring what Black Knights are to Dark Souls 1. They're super strong and scary enemies that you really don't want to run into. Until, that is, you learn how to parry them. When you've got your parries down, instead of being enemies you fear, they're ones that you run towards with a big grin on your face, excited to test out your parrying chops. For number 2, we head to Commander Nile. The Commander is a very interesting boss if you're a parry nerd. Nile and Commander O'Neill are the only two enemies in Elden Ring, to my knowledge, that you can get partial parries on. If you don't know what partial parries are, they were super common in the earlier games. It's where your parry isn't quite perfect, the enemy stuns, but you also lose HP and stamina. If you play Dark Souls 3 and parry a lot, you see these all the time. However, in Elden Ring, I've only ever seen them on the commanders. When Nile gets to 80% health, he'll wind up this attack, creating a massive tornado and charging towards you with an attack that deals huge damage. Now, if you've watched any of my build guides, you'll know the optimal strat here is to just dodge this attack, as that incredibly long recovery afterwards basically lets you deplete half of his health bar or more on most builds for free. What's more fun though is parrying it. And the most satisfying parry in the whole game? Well, it's easy, isn't it? Since long before Elden Ring, I've been hoping that one day From Software might introduce some form of parrying tool for parrying massive enemies rather than just similar sized ones. Imagine being able to parry Midir, Elden Beast or Placidusax. And Elden Ring actually has both of the components to make that a reality. Half of that is Shield Ashes of War, allowing us to augment our parrying ability in some way. And the other half being the Blasphemous Claw item. Functioning very similarly to Karin Retaliation or Stormwall, but in the form of an item, Blasphemous Claw allows you to parry Malekith. And genuinely, I think this is one of the coolest things in any From Software game. Please, Miyazaki, give us some Blasphemous Claw style Shield Ashes of War in the DLC. And now we're into the good stuff. The 5 hardest attacks to parry in Elden Ring. At number 5 we have Godskin Apostle. Apostle has always been the far harder of the two Godskin twins to parry, but there's one attack that stands out even amongst a bunch of other very difficult ones. The full attack looks like this. It starts off with a quick flurry, then into 2 big slashes, but it's a trick. The flurry at the start is harmless, it has no hitbox. And if you try to parry this start up, which feels very natural considering how fast some of the other attacks come out, you get caught every time by the dangerous bit. If you want to get this one, try focusing on the head. The head moves very slightly before the first attack actually comes out, so watch that if you want to get more consistent at this one. At number 4, we have Black Knife Assassins. The Assassins have a bunch of very nasty attacks, and due to their speed, if you're parrying them, you can almost get in the habit of inputting the second you see any movement at all. Doing this though will make you fall directly into another very cruel trap. All the Assassins have a move where they lunge at you with what looks like 2 slashes, a horizontal into a backhand. But just like the Apostle, the first is a decoy with no hitbox. This lunge is actually just a backhand, but your instincts almost always try to parry the harmless wind-up, only for you to get hit by the actual attack. The only way of avoiding this is to know this little trick exists and always be on the lookout for it. I've successfully parried this attack 6 times in my life. 3 for my Black Knife Assassin parry guide, and 3 for this video. And 6 is a nice number, so I'll probably leave it there and just dodge this in future. For number 3, we're going to everyone's favourite overtuned and ludicrously dangerous non-boss enemy. For a bit of a strange one. So picture the scene. You're having a casual stroll through Castle Sol, and suddenly you see a knight in the distance, and think, ah, I'll just backstab him. And then this happens. So this attack that starts off with the knight crossing his swords before going batshit and comboing you to death, and me, have a long history. Back when I was making my original parry guide series at the start of my channel, I got many requests for a parry guide for this knight specifically. When I went to make that video, I spent 2 or 3 hours of my life attempting to parry this starting attack, and I eventually gave up on the entire video because I just couldn't do it. While making this video, I spent a good half an hour doing the same, just to check. It's not an exaggeration to say that I have attempted to parry this attack literally hundreds of times and never got it once. And I know what you're thinking, stop trying then, fishy, it's clearly not parryable, but there's just one small problem with that. For reasons I do not understand, this attack when done at the start of the fight is not parryable. However, if you continue fighting him and he does it again, it becomes parryable, and very consistent too, by the way. For a while I thought that the teleporting right before the attack was somehow affecting it, but as you can see from this footage that I got here, he teleports right before it and I still get it. So to parry the third hardest attack in Elden Ring, you need to first of all survive a non-parryable version of it, stay alive long enough for him to do it again, then try to parry the attack that wasn't parryable 20 seconds ago. The easiest option though, is just parry the last attack in the combo. For number 2, let me ask you a question. In all your time playing Elden Ring, what's the one attack that's killed you the most? For me, that's an incredibly easy question, and it's not even close. So I knew I could get through the Ashen Capital without dying. If I could first try Malenia, I could complete my first deathless run of Elden Ring. Malenia is a hard boss. When you're learning to fight her, your biggest worries are learning how to dodge waterfowl darts, or the clone attack. Both of these moves can be incredibly intimidating and hard to learn. But once you've got any of the known dodging methods down, they become incredibly consistent to avoid. What doesn't though, is one of Malenia's most common attacks. Missing a parry on Malenia's quick 1-2 is a death sentence to all but the most tanky builds. And unlike most of the other attacks on this list, which you might not even see once in a fight, learning to parry this consistently is pretty much essential for anyone wanting to beat her using parry strats, because you're going to see it constantly. I remember when I spent 2 solid days fighting her to get her at level 1 for the first time. This attack was responsible for almost every single death. And I know that many others have had the same experience with low level parry fights. To get this consistently, you want to parry as soon as you see the sword go up. If you're struggling with consistency, the only thing that will help is time and experience. I've gradually got better at parrying this from when I first learned it, but it still catches me out all the time, including filming the fight for this video. But nothing comes close to the number 1 spot. This one took me about an hour of filming just to get a few examples of it, and is much, much, much harder than any other attack in this video. Yep, the Omen King returns for his 3rd appearance. One of the reasons Morgott is so difficult to parry is the existence of this spinny attack of doom that he does. He'll often do this straight after recovering from a successful parry, and it has basically no wind up. It can be really hard to avoid getting tagged by as you make your retreat away from him. This is why you'll see almost every player who does parry strats on Morgott back away following a successful parry, in case this attack comes out next. But this attack itself is parryable. Here's what a successful parry looks like in context. The only tell this attack has is that from Morgott's parry recovery animation, the sword comes right from the same position, whereas every other attack will have Morgott reposition the sword, as you see here. So if you see that sword hover there for a split second longer than it should, hit the trigger because this attack's on its way. So can you actually parry this attack consistently? Well, almost certainly not from his idle or parry recovery animations for a start. I counted 21 frames between the attack starting and it hitting you. Without getting too technical, this means in absolutely perfect conditions, you'll have 12 frames to react to and parry this attack, making it pretty much unreactable for the vast majority of players, including myself, by the way. This took so long because I was just hitting and hoping on the parries. But if you do want to parry it, he also does it right after he does this flip. So by parrying right as he exits that slide, you can get a usable and consistent punish from the hardest parry in Elden Ring.